Well, today is also the day our president, President Obama, turns 50 years old. It's a big day for him. And after the stressful years he's had, he deserves a great birthday and some wonderful presents. But the reality is, the president has been given quite a few gifts he probably wishes he didn't have to open. An unemployment rate that continues to hover above 9%. A stock market that plunged more than 500 points today and will most likely close down for the 9th consecutive day. A Federal Reserve that seems to be stuck in the mud, a cloud of uncertainty, and extremely slow growth. According to some new numbers released by the Commerce Department, that during the second quarter, the economy grew by just 1.3%, making for 0.8% annual growth rate, far less than the 2.5% pace that is needed to keep unemployment from rising. Well, I guess it's no wonder that even President Obama's own former director of the National Economic Council says the U.S. appears extremely vulnerable to another recession. A 1 in 3 chance, in fact. So what should we make of all this? Well, Jean Baker is the co-director for the Center for Economic Policy Research and is here to shed some light on what all these factors mean as the president celebrates another year. Hopefully, maybe another year means a little wiser for the president in terms of how to handle.
Hopefully a better one for the economy.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let's talk about several things. 2 days after the president signed the debt ceiling, raising the debt ceiling into law. Where do we stand? I mean, considering how this debate played out, I feel like we should be breathing an enormous sigh of relief today. I mean, we did it. We passed it. Is that the case?
Well, we should just be happy it's over. I mean, it's absurd it ever escalated to the extent it did, because this has always been a routine passage. Congress, we've raised the debt ceiling, I think it was 10 times in the last decade. I forget the exact number. I mean, we're arguing over sending in the check. You know, if you want to argue over whether you should buy the car, buy a house, that's fine, but we already bought it. So this is simply paying the bills. So it was really kind of ridiculous. And the real tragedy of it is that with the economy basically stagnant, the unemployment rate rising, we're creating very few jobs, Congress and the president were locked in this ridiculous debate, which was not going to do any good at all for the economy. The real question was, how much harm would it do?
Absolutely, and I know we had you on the show here on RT just a couple months ago, and you laid out sort of a prediction for how this would play out. I want to play this back to you, and then I'll see what you think about it.
You envision there's two scenarios, basically. One is that they come to some sort of deal in the not-too-distant future. The alternative is you actually get to this deadline, August 2nd. I know it's a hard and fast deadline, but somewhere thereabout. And at that point, Secretary Geithner presumably makes some statement saying, look, we owe X tens of billions of dollars, have to be paid in 3 days. There's no money in the bank. I can't pay that. And at that point, the financial markets go nuts. So it'd be just like what happened when the TARP was voted down the first time. At that point, the Wall Street people are scared to death. They start calling Speaker Boehner, Cantor, or McConnell. Said, you better pass something or this is it. And my guess is at that point, they go running back.
All right, so what do you think? What was how it ended up playing out what you expected?
Well, it was pretty close to that because there are a lot of reports. I don't have any inside access, but there were a lot of reports the weekend before the agreement that a lot of the Wall Street people were calling Boehner and other top members of Congress and saying, we need a deal. And, they did come to one. So yeah, I think it was pretty much on schedule. The exact timing, who could say, but it was pretty much on schedule.
Let's kind of look at some of the main arguments, some of the nuts and bolts of these discussions over the last few months regarding the debt ceiling. I know, of course, spending cuts were absolutely on the table. Revenue increases were also on the table, as we know. Those didn't end up happening, just the spending cuts. I know that you have argued in the past that what this economy really needs is more demand, and more demand would have to come from more government spending. But that seems to me just to be a very unpopular idea. Congress would have to get involved, and it just seems very unlikely. So your suggestion seems very unrealistic. How do we actually do this? How do we actually put this into place?
How do you get around it? Well, I mean, it would be great if, President Obama's really abandoned. I give him a lot of blame on this because he really abandoned the argument for stimulus. He got his bill back in February of '09, just after he got into office, and he knew, Secretary Summers or National Economic Advisor Larry Summers, has said this. Christy Romer's chief economic advisors, they all said they knew it wasn't enough. So rather than going out and saying, hey, great first step, we're likely going to need more. We have a really big hole, and everyone knew it wasn't his fault at that point. He's been in office just 1 month. This isn't big enough. He instead said, no, green shoots of recovery. were on the way, and he should have known this was not true.
And there are some numbers to show that, right? If you look at when the stimulus went into place and sort of when the money started running out, there was you know, some signs that the economy was improving, right?
Absolutely. It helped. I don't think there's any doubt about it. When you look at the numbers, and some people have done some careful econometric research, it definitely had an impact. They predicted it create somewhere on the order of 2 to 3 million jobs. That seems very much in the ballpark. The problem was we need somewhere on the order of 10 to 12 million. So 2 to 3 million is great, but when you need 10 to 12, it's clearly not enough.
But again, let's talk about today and moving forward. I mean, that's just not feasible. We have the Republicans, in many ways, winning the message war, saying that we need to prevent tax cuts or tax increases on some of these larger companies because, after all, they're the job creators. If we give them tax, you know, a boost in taxes, nobody's going to create jobs. So, and that argument seems to be kind of what you hear across the board when you kind of listen to the average person.
It is kind of funny because most of them seem like they're old enough to remember the 90s, you know, when we had higher taxes and we're creating 3 million jobs a year, and they should remember the last decade when we cut taxes and didn't create any jobs. But that aside, so you go, okay, so what are we going to do? Let's assume for the moment you can't increase spending. Well, there's a number of things you could try to do, and you have to try and do something. One, you could try and follow the path that's been very successful elsewhere, most importantly, Germany, work sharing. It's actually part of the unemployment insurance program, and I think it's 20 states now. President Obama could try and promote that, try and push it. The idea being that instead of companies laying off workers, they reduce work hours. Every month, we have 2 million workers that are dismissed from their job. They're laid off or fired. If you could reduce that by 10%, that's the same thing as creating 200,000 jobs a month. Now, I don't know if that's a realistic target, but the point is that there's a lot of jobs being lost.
But isn't that also going on? I mean, aren't we seeing, certainly when we talk about government workers, we see things like furlough days and things like that, but aren't a lot of people also, you know, what we'd call underemployed? Their full-time hours have switched to part-time?
You do see a lot of that, and I'd like to see a lot more in the sense that if the alternative is laying the person off, you're much better off going to part-time. Not that someone's going to be happy if they're counting on a paycheck for 40 hours a week, but if they get a 10% cut in hours and a 5% cut in pay, I think most people consider that much better than being laid off altogether.
You point to Germany, and in many ways they seem to be a country that a lot of people are looking at as setting a lot of good examples. I want to look to currencies around the world and show a tweet from the global economist Nouriel Roubini. Today he said basically QE3 has already started in Japan and Switzerland, that the Fed will eventually get to it too, but it may be too late. So I want to talk to you about your thoughts on the Swiss and the Japanese devaluing their currency against the dollar, and if you think that another round of quantitative easing here in the U.S. is necessary, and if it is necessary, when the timing should be.
Well, I understand both Japan and Switzerland doing that. Their currencies have been rising, especially Switzerland, and certainly hurt their trade situation. The U.S. is the country, of course, with the big trade deficit, so we absolutely should be looking to get the value of the dollar down, and part of that story would be a QE3. That will have some impact. That by itself isn't going to do it. This, again, is an area where I really blame Obama for being just horribly negligent. He's got vacancies on the Federal Reserve Board. He doesn't even have a nomination. Now, I understand the Republicans are being obstructionist, whoever he puts up, unless, you know, maybe if you put up John Boehner, you know, they'd prove him. But, you know, whoever he puts up, they're going to give a bad time, no doubt about it. But if you don't even put someone out there, you can't blame the Republicans. So he should be having his nominees out there, and he should be leaning on the Fed. The conservatives certainly leaned on the Fed about QE2. My God, they're blaming it for everything in the world. You know, they probably blamed it for the earthquake in Japan. I mean, you know, so they put a lot of pressure on Bernanke and made it difficult for him not to be more aggressive. He should be out there. You know, they have this idea of the Fed being independent. Well, we're not going to fire Bernanke. The point is to say, here's what we think the Fed should be doing, laying out the case for the public, which he's not done at all.
And there are some people that probably wouldn't be very happy about that, though. And let's talk about China. I know China's central bank has been warning of some rough times here in the United States, and we did see China's Dagong Global cutting the credit rating from A+ to A. Meanwhile, we know that the big three firms that most people look to, Standard & Poor's, Moody's, and Fitch, have reaffirmed the AAA rating for the United States. But what do you think it says? I mean, should people be concerned? Should people be paying attention that China is saying, you know, you're going to slide down a grade in our book for now?
Well, I sort of get a kick out of it because really what we've been asking China to do is to stop buying our bonds. You know, that's how they support their currency, how they keep their currency down, our currency up. They buy, you know, hundreds of billions of dollars of U.S. government bonds. That's exactly what they've been doing that we've been asking them not to do.
But they don't seem to want to stop buying our bonds.
That's right. That's right. So supposedly we're supposed to be worried that they're going to stop buying our bonds, letting their currency rise. I'm not terribly worried. If that's what they want to do, I think that would be great. Stop buying our currency, let the yuan rise against it. It's good for China too in the long run. I mean, they're upset because they have a problem with inflation. Well, when I learned my economics, one way to reduce inflation, have your currency rise, suddenly all the imports are cheaper, and then on top of that, that will also slow your economy some, because that's one of the factors certainly contributing to inflation.
And Dean, I know you've been a big proponent of economists, especially in this day and age, needing to think outside the box. You point to the fact that so many economists sort of do the same things over and over, even though clearly some of these policies are responsible for some of the bad situations that we're in. I know that you've supported some of Ron Paul's policies. What do you think are the things that maybe should be really, really deeply considered, even though they're a little different and not the norm?
Well, certainly the Ron Paul policy that I'd mentioned was he had proposed having the Federal Reserve destroy government debt that it holds. And to my mind, that makes perfect sense because the idea, I mean, he came up with it in the context of the debt ceiling. It would get us around the debt ceiling. But I was thinking that was a good thing. That's fine. But over the longer term, the plan of the Fed is to sell that off to the public, and that will create an interest burden on the Treasury. Why do that? We ran up this debt because we had this downturn in the economy. Why do we want to penalize taxpayers in the future? So why not have the Fed just destroy a lot of debt? So I think that's a very good policy.
And one that certainly doesn't seem to be given much attention. But
well, people have to think about it. That's it. And people are reluctant to think in Washington, particularly the economists.
And who knows, if history is any indicator, Ron Paul's ideas that he advocates for 5 or 6 years later, people start to take them seriously. Dean Baker, co-director of the Center for Economic and Policy Research, thanks as always. Your insight is very helpful.
Thanks for having me on.